Okay, thanks very much for that introduction, Tony. A couple of things I just want to refer to before I get going. Graham, your reference to the social side of what goes on in motoring really piqued my interest, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is based around the social background behind what we all do. Norm stole my thunder a little too with his reference to Fizzball living at Newstead, because Fizzball walks in my office about every 3 weeks and we have long discussions about what used to happen in drag racing. Also an interesting connection, I think, with what you said about cams, because the reason Fizzball became a drag racer was because he drove Norm Beach's cars at the drag races, because if Norm drove them, cams would cancel his licence. And so that's how that came about. There's a lot of history behind all that. In fact, Jack Collins is who we're actually talking about. Jack Fizzball, he was nicknamed, but he'd make an interesting speaker here in his own right, because he had a lot to do with the background of drag racing at Calder Park. Had a lot to do with Bob Jane, and he's still a very active, astute man, even in his early 80s. Still working. All right, on with the show. For almost 40 years, signs at the entries to Castlemaine have proclaimed the small regional city to be the street rod centre of Australia. What's behind the claim? How did it come about? This, I've got to remember to keep pushing the button. This central Victorian town was established in the days of the gold rush of the 1850s. For a long time, there's been an unusually large amount of specialist automotive activity based around Castlemaine. And incredible as it might seem, that automotive activity has its roots in those gold rush days. In 1875, the Thompson brothers opened an engineering works, based here, at Castlemaine to repair and manufacture gold mining machinery. By 1888, they employed some 250 workers, and in the production of a wide range of steam engines, boilers, mining machinery, railway equipment, and centrifugal pumps. The factory still exists today, and it still makes pumps today under different ownership. At their peak, they had over 600 employees. Over the next century, scores of men would train in all aspects of engineering production within that foundry and hand down everything they learned from generation to generation. From making gold processing equipment, Thompson's foundry moved into more general engineering as the gold ran out, and they were soon building steam locomotives, 72 of them in total, and other railway equipment. Then later still, they moved on again into pumps of every dimension and capacity. Like most heavy industries of the 19th and 20th centuries, the engineering business waxed and waned through the years and even changed ownership several times, particularly in more recent times. As the workforce was adjusted up and down to meet changing demands, staff would sometimes see the opportunity to set up their own small engineering workshops around the district and set about producing specialty items to suit their own respective markets. With the emergence of the automobile in the early part of the 20th century, it is clear that young men with engineering ability and increasing access to cars, that the two would come together to result in the establishment of a highly specialised, especially automotive industry. It didn't happen overnight. The two world wars took their toll on development as the young men of the district were called on to play their part. But in between, some important advances were made. In the late 1920s, the Melbourne Hill Climb was established and grew to be one of the most popular early automotive events in Victoria. A glance over the programs of those hill climbs reveals some interesting facts. Right from the start, young men built specials to race at the hill climb, often jalopy-like vehicles that used components from various cars that were usually referred to as a whatever special, based on the chassis or the engine used. These programs reveal all sorts of specials among their listings each year until we reach 1948. In 1947, the Ford-based specials, which this is one of them, that was Keith Lady's car, were referred to in the program as just that, a Ford special. That turned to 1948, and those same Ford specials from 1947 were included as Ford hot rods. What changed? Some of the detail is no doubt lost in the midst of time, but I contend that it is no coincidence that the late 1940s period coincides with the emergence of common use of the term hot rod, and indeed the emergence of Hot Rod magazine in the USA. Incidentally, the earliest use of the term hot rod appears to be in Life magazine from 1945, where it appeared on the wall of a garage in a feature on modified cars. That's the picture right there. Things really started to move through the 1950s as cars became more readily available and more affordable. On a small dairy farm at Muffleford in the late 1950s, these hot rod cars caught the eye of a young man named Eddie Ford. And his schoolmate Peter Swift. Eddie had established a pen-friend relationship with an American who sent him copies of hot rod magazines, and the fuse was well and truly lit under the modern hot rodding movement in the Castlemaine area. Peter Swift worked at Thompson's Foundry, along with dozens of other young men, some of whom started gravitating to Eddie's farm to view the amazing hot rods that were being assembled there. All this was happening almost in isolation from the rest of Australia at the time, even though the modern version of hot rodding was also underway, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney. The first drag racing meetings that were held in Melbourne attracted people from Sydney, and this is one such group. These were guys from the Romans Hot Rod Association in Sydney who came down to the first drag race meeting at Riverside, and that's when they found out there was hot rodding going on at Castlemaine. So they came out and had a look. That's on Eddie Ford's farm. That's those same guys in 1964 or 65 as it was, looking at Eddie's coupe under construction. In 1962, the Castlemaine Hot Rod Club had been established, and contact with rodders from outside the region soon blossomed. Castlemaine Rods is the oldest club outside the metropolitan area, and with the possible exception of rickshaws in Newcastle that started at about the same time. The hot rods that Eddie Ford and Peter Swift built still exist today. And in fact, Peter Swift still owns his tea bucket, and that's how they appear today. It's from about 2 years ago. Peter has a bit of a job getting into his car. He's in his late 70s now, and it's quite cramped inside, but he does still drive it. Eddie Ford, Peter Swift and Barry Fletcher, another hot rodding friend from Melbourne, boarded a ship to America in 1966, where they stayed for 6 months and deeply immersed themselves in the American hot rod culture. Much of their experience influenced the Australian scene when they returned, and Eddie teamed up with Sydney sider Jeff Dello to establish Custom Rodder magazine. Dello only stayed in the magazine business for a short time before it became a standalone operation based at Eddie's South Muckleford farm. Jeff Dello went on to form his own highly successful transmission conversion business that still flourishes in Sydney. In the immediate Castlemaine area, several small businesses had also become established to cater for this growing interest. Among them were Diecrest Engineering, commenced by Peter Leno, and Chef City under Bob Bailey's ownership, both holding down full-time jobs at Thompson's Foundry at the time. The core of what has become a unique, regional-based specialty industry was in place by the late 1960s, and it would really blossom through the 1970s. A chance meeting with Eddie Ford while he was on a visit to Swan Hill sowed the seed for my own move to Castlemaine in 1973. What now seems like a fateful series of events saw me visiting Eddie regularly through the early part of 1973 as I recovered from an eye affliction. It didn't take much to convince me that I should move to Castlemaine myself and bring with me a background in newspaper, photography and production that fit perfectly with the basic but struggling custom rodder operations. I also bought my own hot rod that I built on the family farm in 1969 up in the Mallee. In July '73, I became the first import hot rodder to make the move to Castlemaine. Dozens more have since followed, and that fledgling specialty automotive industry has now grown to become a major player in the employment and economic terms for the town. It's worth about $60 million a year to the district now. As each of these import hot rodders has come to the area, they have brought with them even more specialist skills, broadening the range of services available and building a unique industry network. Another hot rodder to make the move to Castlemaine in the mid-1970s was Rod Hatfield, bringing with him his fledgling gearbox adaptation business that had operated from the family farm in Stanhope, where he updated other farmers' Holden utes with his simple Datsun 4-speed gearbox swap, in between milking cows and building his own hot rods. At the time, he had just completed his supercharged shed-powered Mark II Zephyr that's seen here at the 1975 ASRF Nationals in Orlando. More locals stepped into the mix, along with a growing number out of Melbourne seeking a better lifestyle, and the hum of hot rodding in Castlemaine soon became a movement all of its own. 4 partners, including myself, established graffiti publications in late 1976, and the first issue of Australian Street Rodding magazine appeared in March 1977. There were 2 corporate hot rodding magazines emanating from Sydney at the time, this publication, leaving the core of Australian hot rodding media based entirely on these 2 magazines published in the Castlemaine area, Custom Rodder and Australian Street Rodding. From these meagre starts in the 1960s to these specialty automotive businesses continued to expand and develop right through until very recent times. Large signs paid for and erected by local hot rodders at each entrance to Castlemaine, were put at each entrance to Castlemaine in the early 1980s, declared the township the street rod centre of Australia, and it soon became the place to visit for hot rodders from all over Australia and indeed further afield. Most of these hot rodders who established the many businesses around the Castlemaine region are about the same age. That means most are now close to or already retired, a circumstance that triggered the next big thing for Castlemaine. As the original specialty business owners have aged and been forced to consider their own mortality, it became evident something needed to be done to address the potential for this satellite specialty industry to slowly disintegrate. Discussion began with the Castlemaine Rod Club about how this situation might be addressed. An idea was put forward to take the experience of everyone involved in the movement in the district and mould it into something even bigger, a way to not only counter the possibility of stagnated growth, but indeed to take it to a whole new level. Some in the club didn't want to take on that level of involvement, and some were more than ready. So the outcome was to establish a whole new enterprise that would stand on its own and leave the Rod Club to maintain its mostly social nature. The Mayor of the day, Jim Norris, got wind of what was being proposed and offered to chair a meeting to brainstorm the concept to see if it had any true potential. From that initial meeting in 2004, the Castlemaine Hot Rod Centre was formed as a working group that set about pulling all the elements together for a complete resource centre for everything to do with the modified car industry. 3 years' work went into that process alone before the Castlemaine Hot Rod Centre Limited, a not-for-profit company, was formally incorporated in 2007. The company has general membership open to anybody, and the foundation membership group of 30 people who took the plunge and kicked off the whole idea. That foundation membership group is responsible for electing a board of 6 people who are basically left to run the company, with 4 meetings of the general membership being held each year. 2 board members are required to stand down each year, a system that provides continuity but also allows for the injection of new blood as and when required. This corporate structure has proven to be very efficient and always able to maintain its independence. The work done on the original business plan for the new incorporated body has proven to be of great benefit. Not wanting to ever retreat or to reconsider any part of the plan, the board of the CHRC Limited enlisted professional help from wherever it could be sourced pro bono, and we did receive first-class advice that has allowed us to now bring this concept to reality. Along the way, the basic plan has been slightly modified and expanded, particularly with reference to our target market, now clearly based around the entire specialty automotive industry, but heavily weighted by the experience of its members who are substantially from the hot rodding world. Along the way, the CHRC Limited has been fortunate to have the backing of the Bendigo Bank through its community enterprise model that has allowed us to consistently move ahead, even though it's been a long process to get to where we are today. And that's the core of this address. Where the Castlemaine Hot Rodders Centre Limited is today, because we have very recently taken a giant step towards achieving the main part of our goal, the establishment of a complete resource centre for the specialty automotive industry. Excuse me. Still suffering a bit of a cold. Several years ago, we did in fact purchase a farm property at Gowra, 9 kilometres west of Castlemaine on the Melbourne Road, where we intend to establish an outdoor events centre to cater for a large range of events, such things as swap meets, club excursions, all sorts of related events that need a clear open space will be included, without the restrictions encountered by trying to hold these events on conventional recreation facilities where there are cricket pitches, oval fences and buildings all in the wrong places. Small farming field days, sheepdog trials and even school-based tourism activities will be included, as the farm is still a working grazing property with some very important and fascinating gold mining relics that would suit educational field trips to perfection. That's our basic concept design for the property, and it's got all the services running right past the front gate. It's a very, very attractive property. Even more exciting is the recent decision by the Mount Alexander Shire to go ahead and lease the former tech school campus of the Castlemaine Secondary College and sublease it to the Castlemaine Hot Rod Centre Limited and Workspace Australia, who are a Victoria-wide business incubation business. At this site, located in central Castlemaine, the CHRC Limited will establish Autoplex Castlemaine, a complete vocational training and tourism development with interpretive centre, themed cafe, and even longer-term plans to include retirement living facilities. Initially, the Autoplex Castlemaine vocational training facilities will be housed in the former trade training block of the campus, and the Australian Hot Rod Heritage Interpretive Centre will occupy the gymnasium. Right now, the master planning exercise for this exciting project is underway. Discussions are well advanced with industry bodies such as the VACC, RACV, Kangan TAFE, Head Start, Vic Roads, and the Castlemaine Secondary College. It's taken us almost 15 years to go from the germ of an idea to the reality of establishing this unique development. We need strong support from the specialty automotive industry hobby generally, and in reality we are acutely aware that it's taken us this long to arrive at the beginning. But with a pedigree that extends all the way back to the gold rush, the problem-solving abilities of the hot rodders who have nurtured this project to reality, and the support of the specialty automotive industry generally, we look forward to a very exciting future. Thank you.
I just wondered about critical mass, the sort of thing that is necessary to enable some activity to really take off in a place. And whether or not you've talked about some of the particular local characters who started hot rodding in the area, but what else can you tell us about how a place like Castlemaine that wouldn't necessarily have any particular relevance to hot rodding, apart from those characters, how it really managed to attract the critical mass to get to where it is now?
It mostly goes back to that background in the foundry. So many guys there with skills. You don't see much of this on the surface if you visit the town, which is one of the reasons we wanted to do this, to bring it to the forefront where people can see what actually goes on. Some of the businesses there are employing up to 30 people now. And they're entirely based on specialty automotive production. Some of you are familiar with Up the Creek Restoration Shop, fantastic facility. Waddington's now own the Castlemaine Rod Shop, expanding all the time. It's still happening. When I first moved there, those couple of businesses I mentioned were the only businesses that were operating there, and they employed about 3 people because they were part-time businesses. There are now over 100 people full-time employed in these businesses. We have tracked any business in the immediate region, which is essentially the Shire of Mount Alexander, that have a connection with the specialty automotive trades. There are 139 businesses on that list now. That's an awful lot of specialty automotive businesses based in a very small area. We don't even know all of them now. There are more coming to the place all the time. I get people walking my office quite regularly to tell me that they're such and such an engineer, or they're building a motorbike or whatever they're doing. And I say, where are you doing this? I said, just out there, 2 miles away. And I never even heard of them. Happens almost weekly now. The other thing is that there's, just looking at the interpretive side of it, there's nothing in Australia anywhere dedicated to the history of hot rodding, and drag racing for that matter, to any extent. Between myself and Eddie, because we've been involved in this media game for so long, we've got massive, massive supply of historical material. that can go into that interpretive centre. I've got 10,000 films in my own archives, which is every aspect of hot rodding since I became involved, and even going back before that, because I did 3 history books on hot rodding as well, and people from all over Australia sent us their material to put in those books. It's still happening to this day. Every week we're getting stuff sent to us to put in the centre, to the point I've got a warehouse packed full, I've got an office packed full, you can hardly move in because it's all waiting for us to walk in that door. And we're within probably 10 days we'll be signing the lease, and the process will start.
Any other questions?
Laurie, can you tell us a bit about the, well, you had the slide that showed the hot rod centre. Can you just tell us a bit about the physical resources in that, what it actually is, and whether it's open to the public?
Yeah, well, it's not yet. That's the idea. It will be very shortly. It is a former trade training tech school. It was the Castlemaine Tech School till they amalgamated tech schools and high schools. And what happened was the government decided they merged the school into one entity, and about 5 years ago they decided they wanted to build a new school, and they would build it on one of the sites, because there were 2 sites, the high school and the tech school. Fortunately, they chose the high school because it was a flatter site, and they're just now putting the finishing touches to a whole new school there. And the tech school became vacant. They're still using 4 rooms, but it's a trade training centre. That's a huge building. It had an engineering trade training centre, and it had an automotive trade training centre, and woodwork. It even had drama in it, all housed in the one building. 2 stories high on one side with about 10 classrooms in it, and the same height on the other side, but it's all open space in 2 big rooms. The engineering shop's got about 8 welding bays down the side of it still. All the gear's been taken out of it, but we intend to put that back and put in modern gear. And it's not just about old stuff, it's about marrying it with the new stuff, which a lot of what the businesses in Castlemaine do that right now. If you want to put an LS3 engine out of a Chev into a 1954 Chev, you can buy everything you need to do that from the businesses in Castlemaine. We're even now already looking at electric cars and how the customisation or the custom building of electric vehicles for all sorts of things, not just performance, needs to happen, and it needs somewhere that people can be trained to do that, and that's what will happen in that building. The gymnasium has a basketball court in it, and we're going to divide that all up with internal panelling that's movable so that it directs you through a whole interactive centre. It has a big classroom on the side of it, it has a room that's perfect for our archives. So not only will this be about training people in automotive things, it'll be about training people in media and librarianship and archiving, all of those aspects as well. This is what got the education people very excited when we started telling them what we wanted to do.
Larry, I was fascinated by your mention of a residential home for ageing hot rodders.
Ageing automotive people, not just hot. Yeah, people laugh every time we say that. A very serious part of the project, and we get inquiries every day for the same thing. There is, at this school, there's an oval, football oval, which has also become redundant. It's not been included in what we're doing initially, but we're saying to council we want that space as well, because it's ideally suited to build retirement units for automotive interested people with big garages and small living spaces. And right adjacent to they're right there adjacent to the whole facility, and that's where our mentors and our volunteers and all of that knowledge can congregate. Yeah.
Larry, I noticed that you're moving in your name from away from street rod to hot rod. Is that a conscious decision to go back to the old hot rod name?
Yes, it is, and it's not just us. It's that's happening right across the hobby. The term street rod originally was brought into place to get around the negative aspects of the fact that hot rods raced at racetracks, at Speedway, because Speedway had classes called hot rods. So the term was introduced, and some of you might even remember there was a very bad accident here in Melbourne in 1969, I think, or very early anyway. 3 people were killed in a hot rod. And the headline on the front of the Sun the next day was "Ban hot rods." And that caused a big backlash, and so the term street rod came into vogue to educate people that these were cars that were driven on the street, not for racing. A lot of them cross over, but the fact of the matter was it was to soften the attitude towards hot rods. Well, that worked, and we've almost become respectable these days. And you now find that there's a bit of a gravitation back to the term hot rod, just because that's what it is. It's a car that's built out of various bits and pieces. But even within the movement itself, you find some people that say, well, yes, that's a street rod, but that's a hot rod. And you know a hot rod when you see it. And it's just the way the terminology has gone. So we tend to use both now, just so that I don't know whether it adds confusion or whether it clarifies the confusion, but there has been a move back towards it.
Time for one more question. Joe?
Larry, the historic vehicle movement worldwide is lamenting the loss of trade and skills. It has recently undertaken, especially in the European theatres, to actually do something about it. We've actually got the UK Federation now backing some rare skills and providing funding for that to happen. Here in Australia, it's been talked about for a long time about what we should be doing. And personally, I'd just love to congratulate yourself and your organisation for actually taking the step that the rest of us should be actually looking at doing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. It's a big part of what we're doing because everyone sees the same thing happening. We're very fortunate amongst the people who are retiring to our area. There's some very clever people. We have one guy who we rely on very heavily. He turns 80 this weekend actually. But he has more experience in trade training and the establishment of trade training facilities than anyone else I know in the world. He spent his entire life working for the United Nations, setting up trade training organisations, mostly as parts of recovery from disasters, but he has vast experience. And we call on him when we need to talk to people about this, and we're in deep discussion with the TAFE organisations. And whenever they come and we have a meeting, they always talk about how we're going to do exactly what you said, how we're going to sort of quantify the need for all of this stuff. And they start laying out all of the methodology they have to work by. And Bob will sit there saying, I know what you're talking about, I know what you're talking about, because he wrote the book about rigging. And he happens to be right in the middle of our area, so very conscious of it. I travel to America a lot, and particularly this year in America, I saw exactly the same thing happening as you just talked about in England and Europe. Some of the events I go to, we're now seeing trade training organisations with a shop front at that thing, trying to get people to come and do these trades, and we're seeing some really good examples of it. We're very conscious of it, and it's a really big part of what this is about. And that's why I've been harping on about it for years, but we need the industry organisations to get behind us to make this happen. So that we do have people trained in all of these elements of car restoration and car building, and if you analyse it, like I said before, it actually bleeds right through now to the emergence of the new era of motoring, whether it's electric or what it finishes up being, it's all connected.